discussion in collaboration with Dublin Book Festival. I'm Jane Gleeson, the events manager at Science Gallery Dublin, and over the past few months, I've worked with the Dublin Book Festival to curate a panel of speakers that would speak tonight to celebrate the launch of Shane O'Mara's latest text, In Praise of Walking, the new science of how we walk and why it's good for us. In order to truly convey the benefits of walking, we have curated speakers from areas including urban planning, the biology of exercise, and a community-led hiking initiative. If you haven't read the book yet, the Designers Bookshop will be selling it until 8 p.m. tonight, so do pop in after the event and grab a copy. A couple of reminders before we begin. I advise you to use your phone throughout the course of the event, tweet as much as you like, Instagram as much as you like, but just make sure that your phone is on silent. In case of an emergency, look out for the emergency exits, which are here and through the doors that you entered tonight. Over the course of the weekend, there are loads of exciting events taking place as part of the Dublin Book Festival. So do grab a brochure when you're leaving and make sure to check out what's happening over the weekend. Now, without further delay, I'll hand you over to our MC for the night, Pauline Byrne.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming this evening. Very, very exciting topic. I'm delighted to meet the three panelists here. Before I introduce them, I'll just let you know who I am. I'm Pauline Byrne. I'm an urban planner running a practice in Dublin called Brady Shipman Martin with my three partners. And I suppose I have a passion for walking, cycling, moving, and passion of cities. So all of those topics very relevant in what we're going to discuss tonight. Immediately here to my left is Mel McDermott, an outdoor adventure enthusiast who set up Gals Gone Wild, which is an all-female-led community with over 4,000 women hitting the trails, apparently, since Gals Gone Wild was set up just 2 years ago.
2017.
Excellent. So thank you very much for joining us tonight, Mel. Anya Kelly, Dr. Anya Kelly, next to Mel, is Associate Professor at Trinity with a PhD in neuroscience and with a specialisation around the effects of exercise on the brain and how that works for us. And then Shane O'Mara, who's a professor of experimental brain research. And I suppose we're here centred around his new book, In Praise of Walking, and really just to give rise to a lot of conversations around that. So hopefully we'll have an interesting dialogue here, and then we'd like to, welcome questions and answers from the floor. To kick off, Shane, I believe you're going to read a small excerpt from your book, if that's okay.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Let's start our walking story with a simple sea-dwelling organism, the sea squirt. There's an oddity in the life cycle of the sea squirt. This is a creature that lives in rock pools and which during its early life has a single and basic eye connected to a simple brain, which is connected to a simple spinal cord, rendering it in effect a small water-dwelling vertebrate cyclops. During its early development, or during the early stages of its development, it's free-floating, it can swim, it can hunt, it can maintain homeostasis. So this is the ability of an organism to keep itself at a set point to stay alive. And when it's hungry, it hunts, and it can even maintain balance while swimming. Keeping its soft underbelly to the bottom gives greater protection from predators, so it knows which way is up and which way is down. Eventually, though, as it grows, the squirt transitions to a fixed stage. It sticks itself to a convenient rock. There, it consumes its own semi-brain, spinal cord and eye, none of which it now needs. It does this by simply reabsorbing these cells and using them as a meal. The sea squirt then becomes little more than a stomach with some reproductive organs attached. It is a vegetative grabber of whatever food particles happen to tickle its fronds. Now that it is no longer moving, it needs a brain. Sea anemones display a similar, though simpler life cycle. They go from free-moving polyps to cementing themselves to a rock, absorbing the nerve clumps they possess that function like a basic, if distributed, brain. And the reverse pattern is true of certain species of jellyfish. As immature polyps, they are attached to rocks and their fronds float. Sorry, I can't read my own book, which is terrible. I'm about to commit a spoonerism, so I better read this piece slowly. And their fronds float freely. Can anybody say that? In the water. As they grow, they become free-floating, and they develop a complicated nerve net that allows them to engage in patterned movements, to attack prey, and to ingest food. The larger lesson is clear. Brains have evolved for movement. If you're going to be stuck, unmoving, in one place with your food all around you, then why do you need a costly brain? Trees don't have brains, nor do animals with a sessile or non-moving life. But if you're on the move, on the prowl for food or a mate, or looking for shelter, you need a brain. The wider world is complex and presents you with lots of problems to solve, and to solve quickly. You need a brain to control directed movement towards possible sources of food and shelter, and away from things that might eat you. That brain must also learn to recognize good, safe, edible food, and then direct the movements of the body to catch or harvest it.
Thank you. Excellent. I've been dipping in and out of the book all week, and certainly the book seems to bring us on a bit of a journey from how and why we walk to where the mechanics of walking came from, and where we might end up, and how all of this is good or bad for us, Shane. You might give us a bit of background as to the genesis of the book and where it came from.
Well, so the real core of the genesis of the book is a conversation actually about walking that I had with somebody who said, you should write a book on walking. And I thought, yes, I should write a book on walking. That's how easy ideas can come to you, because somebody else gives them to you, which is great. But when I realized I should do this, it seemed fairly obvious the kinds of set of topics that we should address, or that should be addressed in the book. In essence, what I try and do is tell the human story through walking as our kind of unique biological adaptation, because we humans do something very, very odd and different to every other species on the planet. We start out as crawlers, we're on 4 limbs, and around about a year or so of age, we pull ourselves up and we start to move around on 2 feet. No other species makes this transition, but when we do it, everything changes for us, because our hands now become free, our heads become mobile, and we can direct and share attention with other people in ways that we couldn't do before.
And why?
Why?
Yeah.
Well, that's the way evolution designed us.
Yeah.
And there's as little and as much to the story as that. You know, when you look back through the kind of stones and bones of the fossil record, what you see is a long history concentrated in Africa, where a 2-legged ape, smaller than us, and some of them are, you know some of the names. Lucy is a famous one, which lived not in trees, but not in the open plains, but somewhere in between the two. And the selection pressures, we don't know an awful lot about them, but the selection pressures that were on those apes eventually gave rise to us. But the consequence of our adaptation is that we can walk pound for pound, kilo for kilo of food much further than any other of our primate relatives. So the great apes are sometimes known as knuckle walkers. Their range is very, very limited, and they tend to be ground foragers. They're not particularly good at climbing trees, the ground foraging ones, because they're too heavy. We occupy a kind of an intermediate niche, and I guess as the environment changed, we got pushed out. And we got pushed out repeatedly, because the human story is actually astonishingly complicated. There was not a single migratory wave out of Africa. There were actually multiple ones. And we know this because you're all carrying around in you some Neanderthal DNA. You're also carrying around DNA from other human species that existed a couple of 100,000 years ago.
So that push for walking was to cover longer distances and
and we could do it because we're upright. We don't get hot in the same way that other species can or do. So when you're standing up in the noonday sun, you're safe from predators. So lions and tigers and other things that will kill and eat you are asleep during the middle of the day, and you can chase and hunt down animals and do that very, very effectively. And we can sweat. Only horses and a few other species can do that. So we can engage in persistence hunting. We can walk animals down, kill them, and then bring them back and eat them.
So in many ways, this is about survival, really.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Absolutely. And so maybe, Anya, does that bring us to, kind of the protective nature of walking or of exercise for the human, and, being driven by survival, by hunting.
Absolutely, and beyond that, when we think about brain function, so Shane has described how, and he describes in his book, sort of input from evolutionary biologists and how we as a species evolved, and how we evolved this hunter-gatherer lifestyle, where because we're able to walk these long distances, because we can thermoregulate, we were able to capture prey for food. And we were able to do this in a very community-based, collaborative way. And so at the time that those physical adaptations were evolving, changes were happening in the brain that allowed for social interaction and planning and so on. So one of my main interests is sedentary behaviour and its effect on the whole body and on the brain, and how exercise is good for the body and for the brain. And so the implication is that because these sort of brain changes evolved in parallel with our physical changes, or our physical adaptations, that being sedentary or not moving is bad for the brain. That optimal brain function occurs with physical movement. And the fact that we are now, as a population, so sedentary is bad news for physical health, but also for brain health as well.
And have studies been tracking that over, let's say, how our working life has changed? So from the Industrial Revolution to, where it was very physical, manual, to now a sedentary
Absolutely.
kind of domination.
And yes, so we know that we are very sedentary, and I don't mean to sort of harp on about the bad news on a Friday evening as everybody's beginning their weekend, but we are dangerously sedentary as a population. And when you look at the latest data from 2018, only about a third of the adult population meets the recommended physical activity guidelines, which I'm sure everybody knows what they are. Does everybody know how much exercise we're supposed to be getting?
Deep breath, no, please tell us.
So we should be getting, according to the World Health Organization, this is evidence-based, 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise over the course of a week. So 30 minutes most days a week. That is for good general health, and that's a minimum, so the more, the better. Or 75 minutes of more vigorous activity. But only a third of adults in Ireland are achieving, in fact not quite a third are achieving that. And unfortunately for young people, it's much worse. So children and adolescents should be getting about an hour of moderate to vigorous activity every day, and only 12% of post-primary young people and about 20% of primary school children are meeting the physical activity guidelines. So that's extremely worrying in the long term, the consequences for their general health and for their brain health.
How does that compare with other, let's say, European countries?
The methods that are used to measure it aren't exactly the same across the board, but we're around the same as the UK, as you might expect. Some countries are better. Denmark, for example, Germany is a little better. But in general, with our types of societies, we're far too sedentary. And of course, it's very easy to be sedentary.
Yes.
It's very easy to, commute to work on public transport or to drive. And then a lot of us are office-based. We're sitting down all day. And then you go home and you're sitting down, you're watching the TV and so on. So it's very easy to clock up a lot of hours sitting, apart from the hours you spend sleeping, of course. So this all feeds into, obviously, your interest, which is how we facilitate people to move more, to not be sedentary and therefore protect their health.
Absolutely. And some of the implications that are arising out of that in terms of, let's say, children, young adults, and particularly, and indeed older people, this maybe lack of movement. What are the implications other than, let's say, what we'd all imagine are maybe weight issues or, piling on, extra calories? So
Absolutely.
What are the other implications
So
for the brain?
There are implications, well, obviously, say for cardiovascular health and for metabolic health. Sedentary behaviour is associated with increased risk of some types of cancers as well. But in terms of general brain health, Studies show that if you are regularly active, particularly if you maintain activity throughout the lifespan, that decreases the risk of various forms of dementia, including Alzheimer's disease. It's protective, as Shane talks about in his book, against major depressive disorder. And exercise can also be used as a therapeutic. So it's the one thing as well to point out, so it's not all bad news, it's never too late to start exercising if you don't exercise. So there have been studies, intervention studies done in older people, and even taking up or having a structured type of exercise program later in life actually slows some of the shrinkage in particular areas of the brain, and that's associated with cognitive well-being. It's of benefit in mood and depression and so on. So there's a lot of evidence there showing the benefits of exercise specifically to the brain as well as to the other things like cardiovascular health.
Fantastic. That ties in probably, Mel, with what you've been setting up over the past couple of years. Do you want to talk a bit about that? Because I know it ties into exactly what Onia's just been talking about.
Well, I'll just give you a bit of a background with regards to what I do. I set up a women's outdoor adventure company back in 2017 with the goal to get more women outdoors and connected to nature, but more importantly to get them connected with themselves. I used to work in retail management for 15 years and lived in London, had that crazy lifestyle, and unfortunately I burnt out and I suffered with severe depression, and it was a very bad time, very dark time for me, and I found healing in getting out into the mountains and into nature, and it is essentially what saved me and brought me back to life. So I really can't stress the importance of getting outdoors, whether it's for 10, 15 minutes. It doesn't have to be up in the mountains. It can be to your local woods. It can be to your park. It can be any form of outdoor exercise. The benefits are just like monumental. They're absolutely, I think, not enough people realise the importance of it. And that's something that I'm trying to do with Gals Gone Wild. I'm trying to get more women outdoors, get them hiking, get them connected with each other, because it's...
And what type of community has that given rise to? What type of people are attracted to the organisation?
We have, it goes from, we've had 18 right up to 60 plus. So the kind of age demographic is probably 25 to 35. And they're just everyday gals, they're not these super athletes or anything like that, and that's something that I always want to try and stress, is that I think if you're looking on social media and you look at our posts, sometimes it might be like, God, they look like extreme athletes, and we're like, no, we're just everyday gals just going on a hike. So we really want to push that. It's just for it can be a mother, it can be a student, it can be it's for everybody and anybody.
What are they looking for? Other than getting out into the wild,
I don't even think they know sometimes. Like I think they come wanting, they come because they see it on social media, or they're drawn to it, and then I think they get different things from it. So what I've learned over the past 3 years is that everybody that comes on the trail is there for a different reason, and they're not to be judged. And we've had girls that are coming on it for body confidence issues. They feel like they're overweight, and then they come along on this, and then they realize that actually their body is there to get them up mountains, to get them on surfboards. It's not just this, aesthetic that they're, that they need to achieve anymore. Some people are going for, it's for to clear their head. Girls are going there they're dealing with breakups, or it's for everything. It's also for meeting other women, like community. That's what I say, we're a community first, and then we're a business second. Like our community of women, like after here, I'm going to meet a bunch of them, because one of the girls, she's leaving, she's going traveling, so we're all going to have this like goodbye party for her. So it's this community that's just been built, and it's just these absolutely supportive, creative, beautiful women that just want to get together, and in a non-competitive environment. So yes, it's hiking, and we always say that there's other hiking communities out there, and they're amazing, and they do, great things, but for us, it's not about getting from point A to point B. It's that journey that's in between, and it's the conversations that you have on the trail, and it's what it's the healing that can sometimes take place. I tend to kind of go off on a tangent.
No, not at all. In fact, it ties in very well. So it's as much about the physical benefit of the exercise, and actually just getting out there to do something, whether that's in the wild or whether it's more localized to people's immediate locality, but it's also then bonding with community and bonding with other people.
Yeah.
It comes back to what Anya, you were talking about, and Shane, I think you picked that up in the book as well, around solitary walking and then walking in groups, and and the different aspects of that, and how both are useful for their own needs, but bring certain other benefits with them. Anya, do you want to pick that up in terms of the whole community of walking? If building up that interrelationship with people is getting outside your home.
Absolutely, and I mean, in the context, for me, everything's coming back to brain health all the time, because that's my interest. But in the context of brain health throughout life, physical activity is only one aspect of it. There are other things, and the important thing is that these are modifiable things. We can change how much activity we engage in. We can look at our diet. But another really important thing is social interaction. Loneliness is very damaging to our mental health, to our brain health. So I think anything that fosters links and community and engagement with other people, independent of the actual activity, is also really beneficial.
Yeah. Shane?
Yeah, I guess the point that I'd emphasize is that our walking didn't evolve independent of a social context. We walked out of Africa in family groups, in small tribes, and humans do something that's really unique as a species. We gather and march and protest against regimes and politics and policies that we don't like. Cats and dogs don't do this. Other primates don't do this. It seems very obvious when you think about it, but actually it is something that sets us apart, that we can share kind of a community idea, and we can share a loathing of an idea, and we can register our protest against that by walking together in solidarity against whatever it is that we dislike. So humans have this amazing shared capacity to share inexperience with each other and feel kind of sublimated into the crowd that we're walking with, almost like our egos kind of dissolving. It's sometimes referred to as effervescence, or a feeling of effervescence when people are gathered together. So this is something that we're really, really good at doing. But the other side of that, of course, is that a very nice time to walk often is by yourself, because you hate the clamour of everybody else in your head, and you want to get away from people. So humans are very good at solitary walking as well. And we can do an unusual form of solitary walking, which is the pilgrimage. We can walk by ourselves while accompanied by an imagined community. And we will do this kind of walking. Again, think about it in comparison to cats, dogs, monkeys, fish, whatever other species you want to think about. No other species can do this. We have this capacity to enter into a shared, imagined community, and we can live our lives through that imagination, and we can express it through walking. And to me, again, I think it's almost one of the most astonishing achievements that humans are capable of.
Some of the things you mentioned there, I suppose, gathering in protest, gathering in solidarity, whatever that may be, often that is in a city environment, and I suppose it brings us to some of the aspects of where we are now. We're in the centre of Dublin City, which is the capital city in Ireland. One of the questions around our physical health and our mental health, and is really how our infrastructure, our broader infrastructure, is facilitating an exercise-dominated lifestyle, if you like, or a non-exercise-dominated lifestyle. So, for example, in terms of moving, getting to work, getting to school, and I suppose the wider infrastructure we were talking earlier, Mel, in relation to even getting out into the wild, can sometimes be a challenge.
It's not impossible.
Yeah.
There's definitely buses there. I found them all, and they do kind of interlink, but you have to be really, you really want to be getting out. You want to hit the trail, so you're going to have to be dedicated to getting the two buses and then walk for 20 minutes and then get to the start of the trail and then start your hike. But yeah, there's the accessibility I'm just speaking with regards to hiking in mountains, is near to non-existent here. And that's why when I set up Glasgow Wild, we provide a bus, so there's transport included. It's without it, carpooling does work for some hikes. We also encourage that, but yeah, I find it quite difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. That probably extends beyond the immediate. Sorry, do you just do the kind of the immediate Dublin area, or are you all over Ireland?
We have we just expanded to Sligo, Cork, Galway, Wicklow, and Dublin. Yeah.
And then with centres in each of those places for people to gather and then move off into an event. And all of that is then done by the bus network that you're providing, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, because otherwise it's impossible.
It's especially if you're doing like a linear hike, so it's not a looped hike.
Yeah.
You know, you need to have a car at one end and then at another end.
Absolutely.
So it's a bit of a nightmare.
Yeah.
It's a lot of logistics.
Indeed, I find that with my own children. With when we go cycling, you know, it's great if there's a loop because otherwise they're coming back the same way. And
that's
let's
not
face
fun,
it, it's
you know.
really not fun for anyone. Somebody tends to have to cycle on ahead and get the car and come back and get everybody again.
Kids, they tire out, you know.
Well, it can get a little bit draining sometimes. But I suppose, Shane, from your side, commentary around, you know, infrastructure in some of our cities or in even in between our cities or in towns, and perhaps how we're, you know, moving away from kind of more communal travelling and more into independent travelling, which means, you know, private car access and so on.
Well, we shouldn't be doing that. We need to move back to communal travelling. But let's make a kind of a more general point. Humans are doing something really unique, and we achieved it in 2017, which is that a majority of the population of the planet now live in towns and cities. We do not live in the countryside anymore. This means, by definition, most of the walking that we're going to be undertaking will be in our towns and cities. And the infrastructure provided for walking in our towns and cities is generally very inadequate. Even the very best cities in Europe, people point at Copenhagen, for example, it's actually it's not that great. No, there's a whacking great motorway down the side of the main river in Copenhagen, which I was very distressed to see when I went there. But there's also another thing happening, which is that the planet is aging, and we are at kind of the most advanced stage of that in Western countries. Japan probably leading the change there. And again, the infrastructure problem is really quite remarkable. To cross the road, you have to press a button. And the cross speed is set at, in the UK, I don't know what the numbers are here, for a 21-year-old male or female who can walk at 1.2 meters a second. Most people age 65 plus in the UK who have been tested can't walk that fast. So they get trapped on one side of the road. So there are problems where that's concerned. We also have a problem, I think, with our cities. We're living here in the middle of an old medieval city. And to the side here you have Pearse Street, which was originally going to be turned into a motorway and thankfully wasn't. The only way you can get cars through a city is to destroy the city, which does away with the purpose of living in or having the city. And we have to get used to the idea that we just can't pour single occupancy vehicles into cities anymore. There simply isn't the room. And we need to invest in public transport. We need to make sure that it's easier for people to be able to walk around in our towns and cities. We've, in some respects, made great strides because we've now modified footpaths so people with mobility impairments and who are blind or visual impairments or whatever can get around more easily. But the problems we're going to have to deal with are going to arise because of crowding, because more people are living in our towns and cities, and because of changes in age. People are going to have problems with mobility and maybe not want to drive or all of those kinds of things. So we've got a lot of things to think about. And I think our urban planners have really not got used to the idea that the places that people love in cities are not the M50. It's not the Red Cow roundabout. It's Grafton Street, because you can walk down Grafton Street. You can meet, of course you can walk down Grafton Street.
It's the Grafton Quarter.
Grafton Quarter, whatever you want to call it. But it's the parts of the city where we can all interact with each other, we can see each other. Activity is on a human scale because they're pedestrianised precincts. And the shopkeepers, of course, fight against this and then realise that actually walking intensifies economic activity rather than destroys economic activity.
People purchase, not cars.
Yeah.
Isn't that what they say?
Yeah. You make your streets into destinations. Yeah. You don't make them into thoroughfares.
Yeah.
I
I mean, it has to be easy to walk, but it has to be enjoyable as well. Like you say, there have to be,
Yeah.
reasons for people to walk,
Yeah.
and pleasant streets to walk on, and shops and cafes and places to stop, and the green spaces as well, which are so hugely important.
Certainly, as a planner, the issues, of course, that we face building cities, and we all partake in them, is that cities and people take so long to change. Cities, they're a whole web of infrastructure pieces and decisions that were made over time, and to turn around that can sometimes take significant amounts of time. Is similar to how people change their behaviour. Sometimes it can be quite dramatic, but sometimes it can actually just be a very slow process of learning and implementing and changing. And it's interesting, Shane, what you said there around Copenhagen. Some parts of Copenhagen work brilliantly, and some parts, like you said, the motorway is probably a hangover from the 60s or something, like a lot of the British cities were. And thankfully we escaped the motorway effect and the bus garage down in Temple Bar as well. But certainly, one of our critical issues, and it certainly is in media a lot, is around the densification of our cities. And that comes back to what you were saying, Anya, around making cities, making places, I suppose, rather than just cities, making places desirable places to walk in and through, so that there is a sense of stimulation and discovery and I suppose interaction and engagement as you move through your cities. We can all think of streets and in the city centre here in Dublin, some that just are a little bit bland and dull to walk along, and so your journey feels endless. Whereas you walk along a very animated street, perhaps Grafton Street, when it's not too crowded, you can actually get up to the length of the street. It's actually a very animated street. There's lots to see and do. There's lots of stalls, there's buskers, blah, blah, blah. So it's quite an interesting. So I think there is a whole level of, as you said, Shane, there is a whole learning, but relearning, I think, if you like, in relation to the creation of our cities. And that takes people to take brave decisions as well, not just the decision makers, but also people like, everybody in this audience I'm not going to drive today, I'm actually going to try and take public transport or walk or cycle or whatever that may be. And they are key decisions that actually change patterns of behaviour and force then decision makers to change their budgets, because that's what it comes down to, is where's the capital funding going. So, but I'm digressing slightly from neuroscience and all of that area. But Anya, I think that was picking up on your train of thought there around stimulation and making kind of places engaged.
Absolutely, and just fundamentally making it easy and enjoyable to walk, because again, harking back to our general sedentary behaviour, when you ask people why they don't exercise, a lot of the time it's because, oh, well, I don't have the time, or it's not easy, it's too difficult. So there are barriers to exercise there that we have to try to remove if we can, because already the social and public health consequences of this sedentary behaviour are already clear, and they're only going to grow unless we do something about it and really try to facilitate the whole population to exercise. And the easiest, cheapest way of doing that is just to get out and walk.
But we need to think about this. There's a concept called the walkable city, which is a way of quantifying how easy it is to walk in a city. And we've got very good data from smartphones and wearables now on how much people walk where. So the best data available are in the US, and New York should come as no surprise, an astonishingly dense city, and people walk many, many thousands of steps there every day. San Francisco and Boston, the same. Atlanta, if for any of you have been there, a horribly spread out city, I think 200 square miles or something, and nobody walks. And the economic intensivity of Atlanta per square mile or per city block is much, much lower than it is in New York. And the consequence of this, though, is that passively New Yorkers are getting lots and lots of walking in every day without trying. And I think it's too easy for public health to say it's up to the individual. Actually, we've got enough going on in our lives. We need to engineer our environment so that we're walking more. And that really is the key, is because humans are actually built, and we don't really realize it. We can walk 15, 18 miles a day from the age of maybe about 2 years all the way up until 85 or 90. Humans are the best endurance walkers on the planet. And we know this from the lifestyles of hunter-gatherers who are living those lifestyles today in South America and in Africa. They do this day in, day out, without any trouble. And you brought up the point about walking in our cities. 100 years ago, the average London male walked 10 miles a day. The average London male walks about 1.5 miles a day now. So that there's a really, really staggering difference. And it's because we've engineered out the opportunity to walk.
And when we talk about walking, I paraphrase it in my mind, it's movement, it's moving, whether that's cycling or for mobility impaired people, whether that's in a wheelchair, whatever. So that is, it's a moving, an autonomous moving, I suppose, where we're engaged, we're again stimulated. There's a book I came across called The Art of Noticing, Rediscovering What Really Matters, and the author talks about when you're moving through, in some particular part of the book, when you're moving through cities, it's trying to notice the stuff that they don't want you to notice, trying to see the very particular grain of a city or the very particular indentation in a building, or in the knotweed that's growing, not the knotweed, but the weeds that are growing up along beside the pavements. So it's taking your time, slowing down, and kind of engaging more and more with society. From a perspective that I would have is that we're as a population, we can be very kind of, our home is our castle. We can be quite inward looking, our front and back garden, rather than going out into society and engaging with our civic spaces. We see that very much so, as you said, Shane, in terms of protestations and so on, but sometimes not enough to go out and enjoy our public spaces, and that comes down again to engaging at a human level with our public spaces, in my context, but in your context with the wilderness.
Yeah, like when we go on a hike, like I said, it's that between the A and B. That's where the beauty and the excitement, like that's where that happens. Because if you're going on a hike, you're so focused on like wanting to get to the end that you're just missing the reason why you're out hiking. And it's the same for when you're in a city. You're missing like the faces of people. Like I smile at everybody that I see. Like I make it my mission if I'm walking this. If you see me, by the way, and I smile at you, it's just something that I do. It's trying to make your journey like enjoyable, and that's what we try to do on the trail. So we'll stop and we'll get the girls to close their eyes, take off their backpacks, take off their hats, could even be raining, and we get them to just listen. And they're silent for maybe 5 minutes. And then we get them to raise up their hands, and then we get them to raise a finger for every sound that they hear. And then you'll see them, they've run out of fingers, because the more that you listen, the more sounds, you can hear really far away planes and cars and the whole lot. And then they come back, and then I'm like, we discuss the sounds that they've heard. And it's just the importance of becoming mindful of your space and where you are and why you're there, and taking the time to be present in it. And I think, we don't do that I definitely don't do that enough in cities myself.
No, and I mean, I suppose we need to do it on a day-to-day basis and sort of learn about our own community and our own area on that level, because it's something probably maybe a lot of us do when we're on holiday. If I go to a new city, as soon as I check into the hotel, probably no matter what time it is, I'll go out and just have a walk around just to get the lay of the land. And I mean, if you think of somewhere like Paris, if you spent your time going around in the metro from one place to another, you'd miss the entire beauty of it. It's only by walking cities that you really get the feel of the place, under your skin.
Very good, Shane.
Yeah, I think walking in cities, we've discussed this already at the start. I find the countryside a bit oppressive.
I live in the countryside, so we had.
I'm very, very definitely a townie. I like going out into the countryside, but I like escaping it back into concrete. But I like elements of the countryside, so our shared spaces in terms of parks and trees and greening our cities, I think is very important. But I do think the best of walking can be in cities, but also the very, very worst of walking can be in cities as well. A walk, along the M50 again, just to pick on it, would be a really, really unendurably dull, noisy, horrible thing to do. But a walk from here up to Sutton, for example. That's fabulous. Go from here, walk out to Dalkey. That would be absolutely fabulous walk. You haven't left the city, but you've got the sea beside you. And it is concrete the whole way, but it is a really, really wonderful walk. You know, there are lots and lots of good walks in this city. We should have more of them.
It's a great city for getting, we were talking earlier, getting to the beach, to the mountains, enjoying the cityscape, and then enjoying the countryside. Dublin is ideally located in many respects on that. I'm going to open up to the audience. Is there anything you'd like to just throw out there? But certainly audience members, I'd like you to have your questions and get some engagement going. Is there anything anybody would like to say from the panel?
I would like to do a little exercise. It will take 20 seconds.
Okay.
Do you trust me to do it?
Yeah, go.
Yeah. Okay, so if you all just close your eyes. Close your eyes. And I want you to be completely silent. And I want you to imagine that you are in a forest. And it's raining a little bit of wind going through your hair, birds chirping. And now I'm going to say a phrase, and then I want you to fill in the blank space at the end. Nature brings me. Nature brings me. Nature brings me. Any words? Joy. Joy. Beautiful. Any others? Peace? Home? Oh, yes, it's my favourite one. Any
Calm.
other? Calm. Purity. Oh, love it. Yes. Anything else? There's no wrong, by the way. Anyway, my point. If nature brings you joy, brings you peace, it brings you purity, it brings you home, why don't we spend more time in it? It's as simple as that, you know. It gives you all that and so much more if you just take the time to get out in it. So maybe this weekend, if you can find 30 minutes in your day to get out and experience some joy and some purity.
And do it 5 times a week to
And
get
5
your
Excellent. Yes, every day. Don't just keep it for Sundays.
Exactly.
Right, yeah. Very good, okay. On that note, I will pass. Yes, please, first question.
I'll just bring the mic down to you first.
It's a little bit tongue-in-cheek. Just, I'm an avid walker in the city, and again, very afraid of countryside and things out there, past the M50. But can you just comment on the special place of hell that's reserved for slow walkers, please? Everyone on the panel, thank you very much.
I have one of my friends. She is the fastest walker I have ever walked with, and she's always early to things, always. And I met her. She's pregnant now, and I met her. I was meeting her up at Stephen's Green, and she was coming from the bottom of Grafton Street up to Stephen's Green, and I was like, oh my God, she's late. And I was like, why? What's going on? And she rings me. She's like, Mel, I'm pregnant. She's like, it takes me a little bit longer now. And I was like, well, now, like, you know, slowing down isn't so bad. But I'm a slow walker. I'm definitely one of those people that's...
Stand behind me. Honestly, Mel.
There is an amazing thing in the book about the Irish being some of the fastest walkers.
Oh my God, yeah.
Oh yeah. Which is true, at least if you believe the data. There was a major study done a number of years ago comparing walking speeds in about 25 different or 27 different countries, and ourselves and the Swiss were the fastest walkers, and the Mexicans were the slowest. Actually, we have better data now. At least in certain respects, we now know that the Japanese walk the most, They're probably the best public transport. And something I would encourage you to do, if you've never been to Japan, and I haven't either, have a look on Google and just type in Japanese cities and look for the cars. There is no on-street parking in Japan at all. The greater Tokyo area is 38 million people. Japan is one of the world's great car manufacturing countries, and there is no on-street parking for cars. Cities are for people. And I guess density forces that on them, but nonetheless, they're able to run their extremely efficient, extremely wealthy economy, extremely safe economy without providing on-street parking. Loads of bicycle spaces, but no cars.
I'm a fast walker and I try to be zen, but I know I've experienced footpath rage many times, but I just sort of breathe through it and, try to be zen
I've
about
only
it.
recently realised that people don't have eyes in the back of their head and don't know that I'm about to pass them.
And it's the phones, it's the head in the phones as well, and slows people down.
Yes, indeed. Pleasant nonetheless, though. Anyone else?
Actually, on that note, I have a question. I'm a fast walker, and people are always saying that obviously that kind of might relate to stress, and if you're walking fast, it means that you're in a rush and so on. But didn't new research come out recently to say that fast walkers, it's associated with having a longer lifespan? So
Yes.
yeah.
Faster is better.
How come?
Faster is fitter as well.
Faster is fitter.
Yeah.
You're
So it's that-
imposing strain on the heart, positive strain, you stress on the heart, and you're imposing that on the vasculature and on the musculature, and that's good for you. So walk fast. Can you use the microphone?
Sorry, I'm fighting the wind and the cold. So when I walk fast, it's usually because I'm freezing. And it's not because I'm competitive. And sometimes I'm with people and they think, oh, she's trying to warm. I'm not. I'm just trying to keep warm. So if I'm in a warmer country, I can really slow down. So I was just thinking of the Mexicans.
Very good, thank you. There was a question, I think, this gentleman here in 2 rows back. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I realise I'm going to diversify this a little bit and say, what's wrong with cycling? The same considerations apply to cycling as walking. It's good for your heart, etc., etc., etc. But looking in Dublin in particular, I don't live here, cyclists have a really rough time here on the streets. There are no cycle tracks, nothing like that. There's no encouragement for cycling. You have pavements to walk on, of course, but nothing for cyclists. And it seems to me, in praise of walking is fine, but cycling could be added to it, with the added benefit that you can do sort of 10 miles an hour instead of 3 miles an hour on a bike. So your commuting distance or whatever it is you're trying to do is bigger. So I don't want to diversify too much, but cycling is a good idea.
I think that, when I talked about, the whole movement even through a city, I was seeking to diversify a little. I'm a cyclist in the city. I cycle daily and multiple times in a day. So, and I share your remarks about the city. It certainly, there is a good cause and a good fight being fought in terms of trying to improve cycling infrastructure, and a new law this week. And I know the various cycling campaigns are really pushing hard to try and improve that, but there's a lot to do, that's for sure. How it works with all of the panellists, I guess any exercise is good, Anya. Is cycling is
Any
great?
exercise is good. Cycling is wonderful. Again, in terms of actual fitness, if you compare sort of walking on the flat, hill walking is different, but walking on the flat compared with cycling, you will get fitter cycling. But it comes back to, I suppose, ease and accessibility. And when we think about making cities walkable, we have to make them cyclable as well.
And I'd like to cycle, but it's too dangerous where I live, so I don't. What we need to do to make cycling happen is to squeeze cars off the road. And people don't want to hear that.
Yeah.
Again, we mentioned Copenhagen a little while ago. One of the nice things about Copenhagen, not as many people cycle there as the newspapers would have us believe. But there is some really wonderful cycling infrastructure. And well, it's flat, but Dublin's flat.
Dublin's great.
Oh no,
Dublin's
Copenhagen
really-
is flat.
Yeah, no, but look, people can have electric bikes if they want. You know, so people could cycle, but what they have put in is proper dedicated cycleways. In Amsterdam, they've covered cycleways. You know, there's no reason that people can't cycle more if we spend the money on it. We've just decided that actually we're going to spend money on cars. You know, the money leaks out of the economy if we do that. Money doesn't if we spend it on other means of getting people around.
Thank you. Next, just here, yeah.
Hi, I'm just wondering, because I'm kind of lucky I live and work in Dublin, so I can walk pretty much everywhere, but I find sometimes like friends would kind of look at me as if I'm certifiable sometimes when I say I'm going to walk somewhere, that I could get a taxi or drive or get a bus. And I'm just wondering, is there any research on kind of why some people are really into walking and some people just see it as a punishment? You know, because it just feels some of my friends can't understand why you'd want to choose to walk. So just curious of anything like that.
So we know a lot about this now, and what people do is underestimate how good a walk will make them feel. So there's a wonderful series of studies on something that's called dread walking, in what are known as dread walkers. So these are people who hate walking. And if you make them walk short distances to do incidental things, like make them make judgments about the beauty of buildings and things like this, and get them to rate how they're feeling before and after they start the task, what you find is a dramatic augmentation in how well they feel after they have walked, but a dramatic underestimation of how good they will feel as a result of having walked. So people are really, really bad at calibrating and estimating how they will feel as the result of engaging in physical activity.
Is that our laziness drive? Is that the little button that goes,
do you know, that's a good point. I don't know that it is or that it isn't. But you know, humans are designed to conserve energy. We evolved in an energy poor landscape, and now we've got food all over the place. So it could be. But you know, again, for people who dread walking, if you have no other alternative, you have to do it, and you will feel good afterwards.
Yeah. Anya, Mel.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Another question?
Yeah.
Hi. I have a question. Do we think differently in movement? Like, is the physiology different to how we think when we're sedentary?
Shane has a couple of chapters on this, I think.
The short answer is yes. There's a long answer too, but it's in my book. Let's tell a story rather than go through the detail of it. So some of you will have heard of William Rowan Hamilton, the mathematician, and he used to walk from the Dunsink Observatory here to Trinity, which is a walk of about 11 kilometres, and he did that 5 days a week. And he struggled with a mathematical problem while doing this, and eventually one day, while walking, realised the answer to his problem and had no pen, so he cut the solution into Broom Bridge, or into a stone on Broom Bridge. And you know, this projector wouldn't work without him. Your electric toothbrush certainly wouldn't work because his equation solves the issue of joule rotation. The graphics engines in our phones and things wouldn't work without his equation. And we now know, I think, with this high degree of certainty as it's possible to get in science, that walking facilitates creativity and walking facilitates cognition. It facilitates thinking. And chapter whatever in the old book will go through that for you.
We do actually, so after we do that mindfulness kind of task when the girls are out on the trail and they have all of these sounds that they've heard and words, at the end of the hike we'll get, sometimes when we have time and it's a nice day out, we'll get them into groups of maybe 4 or 5 and give them a piece of paper and some pencils, and then we're like, you're going to write a poem. And they immediately get freaked out and they think they're back in their leaving cert and they're like, I haven't been creative, like I can't remember the last time I was creative. And all I get them to do is like discuss the words that they've heard and how they felt throughout the day, and then they write them all out. And the poems that have come out, like every single one, there's hundreds now at this stage, I've cried at every single one because they're so powerful and they're so beautiful. So yeah, just to go back to how powerful it can be, to how creative you can get when you're outdoors.
Amazing. Anya?
I don't think I can follow that,
No,
actually.
that was lovely. That was lovely. Good question. Oh, sorry, and there's a gentleman up here.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, okay. So we've talked a lot about like infrastructure and green infrastructure and the importance it plays on like physical health, like walking to work and like having desirable streets. But I feel like a majority of people spend their time at work. So do businesses and, bigger corporations play just as an important role? Like they could implement, physical activity classes and like have incentives for their workers to join these like after work. And it's like right after work. So, I mean, there's not really an excuse not to go, and there's incentives involved. I mean, like, I don't know. Do you think like workplaces have a bigger responsibility in incorporating these kind of things?
Yeah. I think it's so important. I think that actually I've now got 12 gals that work for me, and I give them mental health days. I think that's paid. It's a paid day off, and it's just for them to go and do whatever it is that they want to do and not feel guilty about it, because I think that there's especially in Ireland, when you're ringing up sick, you feel guilt. Even if you are sick and you're dying sick, you have this like fear of that you're lying, or they think that you're lying, and you shouldn't have to feel that way. But anyway, yes, I think that businesses should definitely have something like a mental health day, or they should incorporate after work hikes, or like we work with some corporate companies and we bring some of their groups on work hikes, and it bonds the team as well, like amazingly well. So yeah.
Yeah, so I think if even if they just wanted to think about their bottom line, and in terms of how well people are working, it makes perfect sense, because it facilitates creative thought and problem solving and just the health of the workforce. So it actually makes economic sense, I think, as well as being moral, for want of a better word.
Yeah, so I think something that's worth saying here, again, in terms of the pattern of activity that humans engage in. So if we have this sedentary lifestyle, which we do, you're not engaging in much movement during the course of the day, and then you hit the gym for an hour. What you will almost certainly do is put on a lot of weight afterwards. Why? Because what you're doing is resting after persistence hunting, or at least that's what your body thinks you should be doing. So the problem we have is to get more activity engineered into the course of our day. So our workspaces need to be designed so that we can move more. I'll give you a simple example. I work in the building next door. To get to the stairs, you have to go through 3 fire doors, and you need a card to get out once you get up to my floor. Whereas the lift is just there. So this is a fundamental design problem with the building, because we don't have easy access to the stairs. Similarly, we are given chairs in my office, because I do tutorials. I have 3 or 4 chairs. So I guess for each person on the planet, we have 10 chairs. So there's 70 billion chairs. I'm guessing. Well, look at the number of chairs in here. So chairs are everywhere. So it's easy to sit down. It's the default. There's a new generation of self-powered walking desks that are paced by your own movement. We should be using these. They're not widely used, or at least as widely as they could or should be. There's a whole lot of simple things that we can do just to make movement easier. We should not be sitting at the moment, which we are doing. We should be having walking meetings instead of going into muggy old rooms. There's lots and lots of things like that which are perfectly fine and reasonable, but businesses aren't doing them, or the places we work aren't doing them. So I think we need not to focus on the individual. We need to focus on the architects who are designing things badly for us as individuals.
Not me, I'm not.
I know. I'm being bold.
Point taken. I think we've time for one last question. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, just first of all, compliments on using the jug for water, because I came from an event just before this and all the little plastic bottles were displayed on the table. So, and this is all nature and how our relationship and treatment and awareness and so on and so forth. In relation to walking in the city, there are some difficulties in terms of for joints, in terms of hard surfaces and so on. Also, the quality of the air is not good. And I'm sure there's other aspects as well, dangers from people with different levels of sensory limitations and so on and so forth. I'm a cyclist, which is even a more dangerous activity, as the person mentioned. And it really is dangerous. Every time you go out, you're in great danger. And I have had bad experiences of it in terms of being knocked out unconscious, etc., etc. And that's a whole other story. I also hike in the mountains. But I'm not too sure whether it's fair to demonize car drivers or all car drivers. There is a history here of a kind of centering the, you could say, travel and communications through cars, and also in terms of planning, in terms of housing. And there's a lot of people that have had to go out, outside the city, distances outside the city, and the commuters. And there's no great other choices apart from travelling in cars. And if there was good options offered to people, then it's fair enough. But otherwise, I think it sets up, cyclists, because in my view as well, pedestrians are pretty bad in Dublin City. Really, they just walks right out in front of you, sometimes knowingly and sometimes, they've headphones in and so on and so forth. So I think it's probably better to try and look at a more benign, constructive approach rather than, picking out. It's obvious. I came through Dame Street before I came on the way here. It was like a bus and car park, right down to Trinity College, just from South Great George's Street down to Trinity College. And it's bizarre how that, has come to be an area that was supposed to be, there was talk about pedestrianised. But so I just like to throw that out in maybe there's a different approach. My real question was about walking itself, maybe not so much just fast walking, which, yes, may be better for your health, but different ways of walking, how you engage your body, how you breathe, what's the mind doing, what's the relationship to the surface you're walking on, whether it's, level and flat or whether it's, undulated, rough and so on and so forth. It really deep into pilgrimage walking was mentioned, so that and other ways of walking being in your environment.
Well, I was the one who spoke out against car owners, except I didn't. I want to I emphasize that. I spoke out about the infrastructure that's provided to people who want to be mobile. And I own a car and use it because I have to. But the problem is there are no alternatives. So, if you're living out in Clonee, there's no tram that runs, or Lewis that runs to out there. So you see these terrible traffic jams. My parents live in Claregalway. And there's a traffic jam that runs from Claregalway all the way into Galway, which is about, I guess, a 4 mile or so distance. And that's solid with cars every morning from 6:30 until about 9:30. You hear it on Morning Ireland every morning. And this is because there are no alternatives. There's no bus service provided. So I don't think there's any intention, certainly on my part, to condemn car drivers because they've got no choice. But the problem is we have made political choices and economic choices that have put people in this position. So that's kind of the first thing I'd say where that's concerned. Where walking itself is concerned, one of the things that I think we don't appreciate is just how automatic it is as a behaviour. So when you're walking, a not widely known fact is if you take a line between what's known as the canthus of the eye, the corner of the eye, and the auditory canal, what we do, irrespective of the surface that we walk on, is maintain that line parallel with the ground. So when your brain gives the command signal to start walking, it sets off a motor program in the spinal cord, what are called central pattern generators, and we automatically adjust as we're walking along. So if you're walking on a very, very rough country surface, for example, what we typically do is, we have a vertical posture normally. We lean forward a little and we throw our gaze out about 2 meters and we flicker back. And only then do we place our foot down. And when we've got a position of stability, we do the same thing again repetitively. And we're very, very good at doing this. Other species aren't as good at it. Four-legged animals can't navigate many of the surfaces that we can, simply because of this, what is actually a weirdly unstable posture that we take. But we're really, really well adapted to doing it.
Yeah, I think your question addresses or focuses on a lot of the infrastructure that's in place, whether that be at the national level in terms of public transport, the city level, or whether indeed, as Shane mentioned, at the building level in terms of the engineering of movement, which I think is a great phrase to take away from tonight. I'd like to thank everybody for turning up this evening for this discussion, and particularly our panellists, Mel, Anya and Shane. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, and as part of the series of talks at the Science Gallery in the Dublin Book Festival. So thank you very much, and thank you everybody.